Welcome to another video, and in today's video I'm going to be covering how to handle extension support. So given the extensibility and the versatility of pretty much all of the e-commerce frameworks that are out there these days, there's a huge amount you can do, isn't there? There's a huge amount of functionality you can add on top of what's supplied out of the box, the functionality the framework gives you just installing from scratch with nothing added. There's a huge amount you can add on top of that, and often this will come in the form of installing extensions regularly from third parties that are not related to your project and are not developed by the developer you've got working on your store. It's a cost-effective way of adding functionality, isn't it? Because you've got these extensions that are in the marketplace, they're already built, they're already tried and tested, and it's a lot cheaper to install an extension that exists already in the marketplace than to get your developer to build that extension functionality from scratch. So often you will install an extension, it will work absolutely fine straight out of the box, it will do what it's meant to, but sometimes you'll run into some issues, won't you, and you need to contact the extension support to get those issues resolved. So today I'm going to be talking about the best way to deal with that, because it's not always a straightforward process. You know, the extension support will be asking for this information and that information, and they'll ask for access to your system and all kinds of different things. So I'm going to give you, from my point of view as a developer, what is the right thing to give to that extension support request, and what is the right information to give them, what do they need to really be able to resolve your issue. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, and I'll go through a few different sections and a few different areas, just discussing those things in a bit more detail. So the first thing you should do when you're thinking about contacting extension support is, before you actually get in touch with them, is to do testing yourself. So get your developer to test in his or her local development environment, and you can also test if it's easily reproducible on production without affecting sales and customers, etc. You can test on there or in one of your staging environments. So it's a really good idea to try and verify before you actually contact support that yes, it is an issue with their extension and it's not an issue with customizations to your particular store and the changes that you've got running on there. So what you'll find is one of the first things that will happen when you contact extension support is they'll try and verify that the issue is actually with their extension. And if you've got the backup of having tested and actually verified locally with your developer, and also you testing as a store owner yourself, if you can verify to them the ways in which you've tested to confirm that the issue is with their extension, that's going to save time with contacting support, and it should get you a result quicker. So typically what extension support will actually support and deal with is the functionality of their extension in a clean environment, so in a vanilla environment where the framework is just installed on the same version as you have running on production, but there's nothing else, there's no extensions or customizations of any kind. So this is typically the goal of extension developers, will be to have their extensions working in this kind of clean environment. In some cases it may be that customizations to your store do mean that the extension that you're having issues with doesn't work correctly, and that is tied to those customizations. In other cases it will be the extension itself, and if you've done the testing from the previous sections I've been talking about and you've essentially proved that the issue is with the extension, then just bear that in mind when you communicate with the extension developers, and don't let that then push that back onto you and say, okay, this is paid support now because you've got customizations to your store. And this is something they'll try, unfortunately, sometimes, rather than just go away. I mean, the ideal would be, isn't it, you contact them and they go away and they attempt to reproduce that in their local environment, and then you have a conversation as to how best to resolve that, and you give them the information they need, and then they take that away and do some testing and research that and look into how to fix it. the reality is that that's not always the way it goes, so you need to fall back on that information and that testing that you've done in your previous section to make sure that you've got that information to pass on to the extension support, so they know that this is definitely an issue in their local development environment. They should be able to reproduce it, or if there's a potential for it to be an issue relating to your own store customizations. If it is relating to your store customizations, then they may come back and say, okay, this is paid support, we've proved it's kind of relating to your store customizations rather than an issue on a vanilla install, and hopefully your testing that you've done yourself will back that up, and in that case they will ask most likely for paid support. So at that point you have to decide, do you go with their paid support or do you get your own store developer to look at the issue? It's up to you really which way you go, but sometimes it's going to be a bit quicker to get extension support to resolve the issue. It probably will be cheaper as well, purely for the reason that they are very familiar with that code, because that's an extension they've developed themselves. Not that your developer couldn't very well handle resolving that and implementing a fix, but unless it's clear where that issue is, where the source of the issue is, which your developer may have found out already, but unless that is the case, then they've got to go through the debugging process in a bit more depth than probably the extension developers will have to, and that will mean it will take more time and probably cost more than having someone who is familiar with the code look at it and implement a fix for your particular store, even if it is paid support. Something else that's worth you being aware of is essentially what the extension developers commit to when they decide to release a extension to the general public. So creating and releasing an extension is not a case that you build the extension, you release it, job done. You actually, in releasing that, commit to ongoing and constant support and maintenance and renewal and creation of new versions of that extension for pretty much the duration of that extension's life until you decide to retire that extension. The developers should offer support and they should offer new versions. So that's something that you can expect from them. So if they try to say to you, this extension works perfectly, which I've had quite a few times in the past, they'll just basically refuse to acknowledge that there could be an issue with their extension, and that does happen sometimes. Thankfully not a great deal, but if that does happen for you, then you can continue to push them and say, okay, well this is an issue with your extension, we've basically proved it in our testing, can you continue to look at it? And if they don't want to continue to look at it, then my advice would basically be to request a refund from them and have your developer look at that issue and resolve it sort of in-house, if you like. It's an unfortunate truth that extension support isn't always as helpful or useful in resolving issues as you would like them to be. So sometimes you will come across a case where the developers are essentially blankly refusing to accept that there could be an issue with their extension and claim that it works perfectly. Any quality extension developer, hopefully you will not get that from, but sometimes you can't always go for the big tried and tested extension developers for specific features you're looking for. So sometimes you might find that you have to go with a less well-known development company to give your store the functionality that it needs. And sometimes the extension is not as good with these companies. It doesn't mean to say that the extension doesn't do what you want it to do, but just be aware in some cases you can get that kind of response from extension developers. But by releasing that extension, your expectation can be to put on those developers that they have committed to releasing new versions and bug fixing and working with customers who are using that extension on their store to make sure that it's working in environments that they need it to. So bear that in mind, and if you don't get the kind of good response that you would like to from support for a particular extension, then you're very well within your rights to request either a full or a partial refund and bring that resolving of that bug or that issue in-house with your developer that you've already got working on the store. So the next point to make is don't let the extension support push the blame of the issue you're having back onto you with a claim that you've got customizations to your store, we can't actually help you because it's probably that's causing your issue. So this you back up with the testing that you've done already before you even contacted support, so you can go back to them and say, well actually no, we've tested this and this is the results we've got, and this pretty much proves that the issue is with your extension. So sometimes you do get that's a pretty standard response really, to push the blame or try to push the blame back onto you just to make their life easier. We'll push that issue back to them because I don't want to deal with it, kind of thing. That's not really how support works, is it? Once you release an extension, you're going to get requests from all kinds of different people running all kinds of different stores with different configurations. So while it's true that while you develop that extension, your goal is to have it working in a clean vanilla environment, realistically, who runs just a completely unaltered environment just with one extension on it? That doesn't happen, does it? So the extension support should have an expectation they're going to be contacted by all kinds of different store configurations with all kinds of different amounts of development that's happened on that store, and they should agree to offer support in those cases regardless of whether it's a vanilla environment or not. So yeah, just don't let them push the blame for the issues that you are having back onto you, and use the testing that you've done before you contacted extension support to back up your claim and to push the issue back their way, because they have obligation really to look into that for you because you have bought the extension, you've paid for it, and with that comes a certain level of support which you can reasonably expect. So the last point to discuss is when you'll inevitably find extension request access to your servers and your systems. This happens really often, really regularly. I don't know why really. It's a common sort of approach for extension support to just ask for full access to staging or production systems in order to debug and fix the issue you're having with their extension. Realistically, debugging and fixing an issue in a remote environment is a highly ineffective, highly inefficient way of doing it. If you've watched my previous video on the tools that your developer should be using, then there I talk about different environments and why the local development environment is the area where you need to be able to reproduce that issue in order to debug and fix it. The same is true for extension developers. There's no difference there. So if they request access to a staging or a production environment, all they've done is ask for access in a way which is going to be highly inefficient and a slow way for them to debug and find anything really useful. So the reason it's slow and inefficient is because you can't run the development tools you have available locally in a remote environment. So there's a particular tool called Xdebug which allows you to in some detail analyze and look at code and how it's running and the results of running code. So you don't have this Xdebug tool installed in staging or in production just because there's a performance hit. So typically that will only ever be in a local development environment. So that's why it's an ineffective and slow way of debugging in a remote environment, because actually all you're left with without this Xdebug tool and the proper development tools is guesswork really, and sort of guessing, oh maybe this code is running like this and maybe this is happening or that's happening, but actually seeing and analysing properly what is happening is basically impossible. So when you have extension support request access to your systems and request FTP access or SSH or admin logins or anything like that, just push it back to them straight away and say, no, you don't need access. Please attempt to reproduce this in your local environment. This is the testing we've done. These are the results that we have found, and this pretty much proves that it is your local environment where you need to be working. There's very, very few situations where it's actually a viable proposition for them to need access on your remote environments. And I think in all the time that I've been dealing with extension support and debugging and fixing issues myself, I can't even think of one case where it's actually been a good approach to have access to a remote system to debug and to fix an issue. So that should always be the goal when you're debugging and fixing an issue, would be to reproduce that locally. So that's why it's really a poor approach and a poor request from extension support to get access to your systems in order to debug and fix the issue. So as soon as that request comes in, just push it back and don't give them access. Thanks very much for watching the video again. We've got plenty more videos on all kinds of different topics on our YouTube channel, so check us out and see what I'm talking about. I talk about a range of different stuff. The focus of all of my videos is the client perspective. So I'm a developer that's been working with Magento and been involved with web development for many years now. I've been developing Magento for over a decade and been involved in web development since the 90s. So a long time, and I try to give you, from a developer's perspective, as a client, I try to give you a bit of insight into good ways in which to handle different issues like extension support that I've been talking about today, how to work with your developer, how to efficiently develop your store and get something up and running quickly and in a time efficient and cost efficient way. So there's all kind of different topics on the YouTube channel, and also if you want to track down a developer for your Magento store, then come and check us out at Developer Connection. We give you a range of quality UK-based Magento developers on there. They're all experienced, they've all got years of experience under their belt. You can look at the profile of each developer that gets matched to the project which you can create on there, so you can get a full breakdown of their experience and what they've worked on and their history with working with Magento. There's no obligation to pick any of the developers you find. There's no obligation to work with any of them. So come and check us out, come and try us and see what we're all about. I think you'll be pretty happy with the range of developers that we offer on there. And thanks very much for watching the video, and check out the next one, which will be coming soon.